Hi, my name is Noor Hawila, and I'm going to be presenting a project I worked on with Dr. Arthur Berg that focuses on assessing the impact of COVID-19 on registered interventional clinical trials. We have seen throughout 2020 how COVID has disrupted ordinary procedures and made it extremely difficult for doctors and researchers to proceed with operations and projects like usual. A number of clinical trials have also ceased operations since the pandemic started. So, how do we examine whether COVID has truly impacted clinical trials, and how can we quantify that impact? To answer that question, we will be using clinicaltrials.gov and CTTI to retrieve our data. To better understand what factors affect our differences, we associate with each clinical trial registered after March 2016 a country and subsequently a region based on the country of the source listed for the trial, and identify each source as being a pharma, biotech, for profit company versus an academic medical center, hospital, or non for profit foundation. The main outcomes we will be looking at are the number of submitted and the number of completed interventional clinical trials aggregated by month. We plot the log transformed number of submitted clinical trials in the United States taken from the 2020 dataset. We skip the data from March 2020 and use the data from the 36-month pre-COVID in blue to predict the monthly seasonal patterns by fitting a Fourier series depicted in magenta, and then extending those predictions to our post-COVID month in red. For our comparisons to make sense, we go back to 2019 and do the exact same process, treating March 2019 as the month when COVID presumably happened. The seasonally adjusted outcomes for 2019 and 2020 would now be the difference between the observed data and the Fourier predictions. Using the seasonally adjusted data, we first modeled the difference in seasonally adjusted log counts between 2020 and 2019, and also fit a comprehensive statistical model that controls for the log counts by including the counts from the previous year on the right-hand side as predictors in the model rather than taking the difference. We also include predictor variables for the time t and month, COVID indicator as to whether that month is pre or post COVID, region, whether it was Asia, Europe, United States, or other, sector, academic or pharma, and an interaction term between sector and COVID. Looking at the model results, where the y-axis represents the difference between the seasonally adjusted log counts for submitted trials in 2020 and 2019, and the p-values represent the significance for testing whether COVID had an impact on the difference in these counts. The United States is the only region that showed a significant increase in the number of submitted trials after COVID, which could be associated with the influx of COVID-19 specific trials in 2020, where 472 post-COVID trials were identified as COVID-19 related trials. The United States had a very sharp and significant decrease in completed clinical trials post-COVID compared to that significant increase we saw for submitted trials, and a similar significant decrease is seen in Asia, whereas in Europe the trend seemed to remain relatively flat. Overall, a significant decrease is seen in the number of completed clinical trials post-COVID. Examining now the differences between academic and pharmaceutical sources for submitted trials first, we see that academic sources had a slight insignificant decrease after COVID, whereas clinical trials with pharma sponsors increased dramatically after COVID. Moving to completed clinical trials, we now see that both academic and pharma sources had a significant decrease in number of completed trials post-COVID, though the effect is slightly stronger for academic institutions. Mapping the percent changes in submissions for each country between April through October of 2019 and April through October of 2020, we can see some variations throughout. Observing completed clinical trials, we see that there is much more orange and red patterns here, indicating a decrease in the number of completed trials. Examining the comprehensive model regression results, we don't see an effect of COVID on the number of submitted clinical trials, but a very significant impact is seen on completed trials. We first see that the number of submitted trials in Asia is significantly more than that in the United States, but no significant differences are observed with Europe, and no significant differences are seen between regions for completed trials. We also show that being an academic source had no significant effect on the number of submitted clinical trials before or after COVID, but was significantly associated with a decrease in the number of completed trials after COVID compared to pharma companies. In conclusion, we did not find a significant impact of COVID-19 on the number of submitted clinical trials. However, COVID has hampered the completion of clinical trials almost universally, and pharma trials seem to be more resilient to the effects of COVID compared to academic trials. Our analysis was based on the clinical trials registered on clinicaltrials.gov, which may not present an accurate assessment of the true number of trials, as there could be some that are missing from the database and potential disparities in reporting across different locations. Finally, as the COVID pandemic is still ongoing at the current time, its long-term effects on clinical trial research are still being realized and will only be clearer as time progresses. Thank you.